Hello, creatives. Here we are, the last stretch of the year, and I know that many of you are probably really busy and overwhelmed and preoccupied with the holiday season. But I'm here to remind you, I hope that you're taking some time to kind of take a breath, be still, be present, so that you can get back to your heart center, back to your creative self, even if things are hectic and buzzing around you. I know it's challenging during the holidays, but I just wanted to be a quick reminder so that you could even in this moment that you're listening to my podcast, that you could just take a deep breath in and exhale out. I think those are important. We forget that. So here we are, finishing up the year and then anticipating a new year. So I thought in this episode it might be a good idea to talk about the beginner's mind, because I think it's very important to be reminded how valuable the beginner's mind is. So I'm going to quickly talk about what is the beginner's mind. For those of you who don't know what that term is, it actually is a term from Zen Buddhism, where it's about being open with a beginner's mind to actually approach things, whether that's a subject matter or a craft that you know very well, or you have a lot of experience, a lot of education around. Maybe you're even an expert in your area, but you stop to try to approach that with a beginner's mind so that you can stay open to new perspectives, open to curiosity, childlike curiosity, and also to give you permission to not know. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today, because I think it's valuable when it comes to your creativity. It is also valuable when you're learning something new, or if you get stuck. And now I'm going to go into how easy it can get stuck in a corner because we think we know it all, or maybe we think we have enough experience and we should know. Because from my own experience, I've actually found the beginner's mind can be very valuable in discovering, new creative perspectives, new ideas, and even achieve new creative results. So when we approach the beginner's mind, we have an attitude of the idea that, well, I'm going to look at this as if I don't know anything about it, right? I'm going to approach this with a childlike curiosity, meaning I'm going to allow myself to follow the curiosity. And that means, oh, I wonder if I did this, what would happen if I did this? I'm going to actually try something that is totally unexpected, unpredictable, unmapped out, and I'm going to try it and see what happens. It's the idea that, yeah, I've done it before hundreds of times, many times before, but I'm actually going to try it with a different perspective. So, part of a beginner's mind is also letting go of expectations that you place on yourself. So what happens is that sometimes, we approach something new, especially if we're learning something new, and I see this a lot with my students who are beginners. They have this expectation that they put on themselves that I should know how to do this, or I should be able to have the perfect results the first time, right? And I believe that this comes from that place of maybe we have a lot of doubt to begin with, and in our creativity, in our creative self, and we want to get from point A to Z very quickly so that we can appear competent, or maybe we're afraid that somebody will find out that we don't know what we're doing, right? So it's very important to let go of those expectations that I should be able to do this perfectly, or I want to do this right. I don't want to be wrong. I think that comes from our education, right? With you either get an A or you fail, or you got all these wrong and all these correct. So there's a lot of emphasis on being correct, being versus being wrong. But sometimes when we are approaching something new, we have to give ourselves permission not to do it perfectly the first, second, or third time. That we give ourselves permission to know that we are learning and in the process of learning. So that's why it's important to think about letting go of those expectations that you put on yourself. And what's really great about the way that I have set up my mixed media workshops is that I want to sort of deconstruct some of that expectations, because I realize a lot of students, especially students who are new to some of my workshops or my courses, they're going in, with a little bit of doubt, with a little bit of maybe apprehension about whether they're going to actually do a good job or create something nice, and that fear that everyone else seems to know what they're doing or are more creative. And what happens is that they're already bringing that into the room. And I love being able to create classes that actually promote that playfulness, promotes that curiosity and exploration, and that it's okay to be spontaneous and imperfect. So I think that's important to remember, because number one, when you're learning something new, it's perfectly normal to be doubtful about whether you're going to do a good job, whether you're going to get it correct. I think that's a normal reaction. But it's important for us to recognize that's what we're bringing in to the situation, whether you're learning a new craft or something new within the subject matter that you're an expertise in. It's very important to say, okay, I'm in the process of learning something new, and I'm going to have that beginner's mind also. So there's a couple of different things there too, is that you have the intention of allowing yourself to have that beginner's mind. And that means when you give yourself that permission, it's much easier to be open to learning new perspectives, learning or discovering, even more important, discovering something new, right? So getting back to, having this pressure to do it right. A lot of times what I've seen also is that I'll have a student come in and they have this expectation, and sometimes I don't, sometimes I sense it and sometimes I don't. I don't know. And then all of a sudden it doesn't come out the project doesn't come out, or the technique doesn't come out the way they had expected. A lot of times I hear this: I did this wrong, I screwed it up, I really messed this thing up. It's like there's a lot of statements like that are often expressed. And then they go into this place of I'm no good at this. I told you I wasn't really creative. And it could also be that class, my class, was the first art creative class they took. And now it's almost like they're looking for confirmation that I'm no good at this. When really it's like, but you're a beginner. You're starting out. You are expected not to know. You are expected not to do it right the first, second time, or even the 20th time. I tell my students, do the technique once, twice, 3 times, just to get familiar with the process. And then you really get into it. You'll start seeing some transformation in what you're creating. But to have that expectation at the get-go, sometimes it's not allowing themselves or giving themselves permission to have that beginner's mind, right? So the thing is that when we take that pressure off, we remove the limitations. We kind of can open up that space, right? That space to make mistakes, to allow accidents to happen. And it also allows you to discover, almost like I said, when you let accidents happen, you discover these sort of creative gems that just kind of surface that you didn't expect. And that's kind of what we want to happen. But we really do need to let go of that pressure that we put on ourselves. So that's really important. So one of the things also that I recognize around this whole topic is I'm the expert. I'm supposed to know what I'm doing, right? Because I'm the teacher. I've had many, many years with the creative process. But yet, it's very interesting, and it's actually not surprising now because it's happened so much in my classes. And I can't tell you how many times I've witnessed my students who are starting out. They still have this sort of beginner's mind because they're still open, and they do something and they have this creative result. And I'm like, oh my God, that turned out so cool. I wouldn't have thought of that. And that's what's really cool about what I see in terms of the results of someone who has a beginner's mind and not tainted with all the life experiences or all the experiences creating in the art education. Sometimes because they don't have that, it's like they're so free to come across those accidents that result in this really cool creative thing on their artwork or their project. And what's interesting too is that I feel like I still learn from my students. I get inspired by them by watching what they do, by watching them explore and be spontaneous. And what's really cool is that I learn from them, because I do believe that the thing with, and this is the whole humbling part of the beginner's mind versus the expert mind, is that a lot of times I have so much experience in education and fine-tuning things in my craft that kind of limits me in a way, or can get me back into a situation where I'm just fine-tuning or perfecting something too quickly, or that the project I'm working on gets too tight too soon. And I get humbled by observing and watching the magic that happens with my students who have sort of this childlike curiosity, and they experiment and they're being spontaneous. And that's what's really cool for me, is that a lot of the workshops, the courses that I've designed, have been inspired by my students' discoveries. Stuff that maybe I wouldn't have thought of, they come up with something and I'm like, that's kind of cool. And then they'll say, well, you should teach a class around that. And it's like, I should. And I think sometimes what happens is that's how creative spirit works. That's how creative energy works. It shows up in the most unexpected times. So that's one of the great things, is that my students are still teaching me. If your mind is empty, it is always ready for anything. It is open to everything. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. Shunryu Suzuki. So another thing about the beginner's mind is that there is an eagerness to learn, a craving to learn new things. And when we are the expert or the experienced or the educated, and we've been doing this for a long time, even if you don't have the art education behind you, but you've been doing it for a long time, you know the process. What happens is that we kind of lose that, I guess it's kind of a hunger, right? A yearning for, ooh, I wonder if I did this way, if this would fine tune it. It's like I myself can remember when I was learning mixed media. I was self teaching myself mixed media, and it was just like I couldn't wait to get back in the studio and try that one technique out, and then try it again and try it again. And then this time I would try it with this medium or this material. It was like there was, and I think that's part of the beginner's mind, there was this so excitement and eagerness to figure it out, to experiment. And we have to watch, especially for those of you who are seasoned artists, that you need some time to go back to that beginner's mind, go back to that childlike curiosity. It's almost like you have to intentionally forget everything you've learned and intentionally forget everything you've experienced in the studio, right? So, and I think this is why it's important to take a class in a medium that is totally not your thing. Like, for example, if you're a two-dimensional or painter and you do primarily two-dimensional art, to start integrating three-dimensional or sculpture or ceramics. It's like when you go and you take an entirely different technique, entirely different medium, it forces you back into that beginner's mind place. Now you're a beginner again. You don't, especially if it's a medium that you don't know anything about, that forces you to be in that place again. So there's something good about that. I think that's why sometimes I'll take a class that's completely not my medium on purpose, just to shake things up, because maybe I feel stagnant. Maybe I feel stuck in the same routine, and something isn't really getting my creative juices anymore. The inspiration isn't as exciting as it was when I was first learning it. So sometimes it's good to recognize that when you're at that place, like maybe I've just become so good at this one thing that I really need to change it up, because that's what happens, and it's totally normal. So that's just something to think about, because I know that when we get to that place, and sometimes we don't know we're there, but when we get to that place where the ego, and I'm not talking egotistical or arrogant, but the ego that wants to know how to do things, wants to know what steps to take to get this result, or what steps it knows to take to get this result. Sometimes the ego gets so wrapped up in what we know how to do, our expertise, our experience, that it can limit our perception. So in other words, instead of getting a fresh new eyes on that project, instead of getting a fresh new perspective on that project, we're kind of limited. We have sort of these blinders on because we've been doing it too long this way, with the expertise that we have. And trust me, it's important as an artist to really hone in on your craft and get to know your craft. But you also have to recognize when you're so good at it that you need to shake it up. And you might be losing that fresh perspective that you need to ignite a whole creative inspiration in your medium and a whole new creative result, that if you are finding yourself bored and you're not excited about what you're creating, you have to find that place. And that's what's very cool about being creative, is that you can start here, get really good at it, know how to do it, be a pro at it, and then intentionally decide to go back to the beginning and see what you can do to change it up, introduce a new material, introduce a new, completely new creative medium or avenue or skill, and creativity still works the same. So that's what's kind of cool. But we do need to know or recognize when we are feeling we're in that place where we're just all knowing, right? And that we're not allowing ourselves the opportunity to not know. So that's kind of important. I think what happens is sometimes deep down inside, we're holding on so tightly to, well, I don't want anyone to know that I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't want anyone to think that I'm incompetent. So, we overcompensate for that by saying, well, this is my expertise and I have experience, versus just saying, you know what, let's see what happens. Or I'm going to let myself experiment and see what happens. And there's no expectation, right? So when you approach the creative process with a beginner's mind, you're open to trying new things. You're open to experimenting, exploring. It's almost like sometimes you can be exploring new territory, right? I think this is what happened when I finally started jelly printing. I was a little bit avoiding that because I thought, it's just one of those other trending art techniques. But, my students kept saying, you really got to check it out. You really got to check it out. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I couldn't believe why didn't I do this sooner? Because it just opened everything up, and it's such a spontaneous process, that you don't know what you're always going to get. And a lot of times you do not get the same thing each time. No matter how much you try to control it, you're going to get a different result each time. So jelly printing is really a great way to just break up a little bit of that controlling or overthinking. Or, sometimes if you're stuck in that sort of repetitive pattern or process of getting the same results, jelly printing is just really good at shaking all that up and forcing you to really just be open to the unexpected. When you pull that print up, it's almost like, I don't know what I'm going to get. And then you check it out and like, oh my God, that's so cool. The not knowing is crucial to art, is what permits art to be made. Without the scanning process engendered by not knowing, without the possibility of having the mind move in unanticipated directions, there would be no invention. Donald Barthelme. Another thing too is that a really good example is that when I put together a class, I have to go and I actually have to put the project together by hand and see how, the process is going to go so that I can break it down to steps when I teach it. And a lot of the times, because it's such a new technique, new project, I get a little messy, clumsy. I get, because I'm trying to figure it out, right? And an interesting thing happens is once I got the technique down, or once I've got that project down, because now I know how to teach it to my students, I'll start, creating the project over and over and over again every time I teach it. It starts to get tighter. And when I mean tighter, if I were to look back at the very first piece that I did when I was experimenting and trying to figure how it's going to work and what steps to take, there is an organic, sort of imperfect feel to it. And I always end up loving that. And I always end up going back and like, how did I do that? I love the way that looks. Versus if like the 50th project that I did, when I look at it, I could see that I got tight I could see that I started to control it. I can tell that now it's just losing that organic, spontaneous feel. And that's just another reminder of, oh, okay, I've been doing this particular project over and over too much. You know, I need to try to find ways to shake it up so I can get back to that sort of organic look, which is absolutely what I love. But that's another really good example of that. So ultimately, the beginner's mind is really about having a mindset where you can give yourself permission and be okay with not knowing how to do it, not knowing how to do it perfectly, getting messy, screwing it up, giving your permission to mess it up, make a mistake, have accidents to happen. Beginner's mind is also being open to being surprised at how the project will come out. It may not come out how you expected it, or maybe you wanted it to look just like, how the teacher taught you, and it's not looking that way. And then you get disappointed, right? Beginner's mind is also being able to let go of that original vision of what you think it should look like. But beginner's mind is about being open to what creative spirit wants it to look like. Because each of us will infuse, if you allow it, infuse your own style, your own preferences into the project or the technique. So remember, creative spirit loves to play. It wants to help you get back to that childlike curiosity, because that's where it all began. And it's important to remember that when you set that intention, no matter how much experience you have, no matter your education, your expertise, if you just set that intention to say, I'm going to allow myself to be a beginner, you might just find that you will be re-inspired creatively and come across something magical that just excites you. And I believe that in itself will help you continue to not only tap into your true creativity, but help you to continue to create over and over again. Because what I'm talking about in this episode is really one of those things of many things that we have to be aware of and recognize in the creative process, because creativity loves to move in different directions. It will start here and then lead you down this road, and then it'll turn around or pivot and say, well, we're bored with that now. Let's do this. Let's check this out. I know for me, creativity does not like to get bored. It is looking for the next thing that could excite, energize. And this is not, just reminds me of something that I was thinking about. When I was setting myself up for a body of work and that I was going to show my stuff in the gallery, I remember just researching about this process. And one of the things I read was, you need to stick with one style, basically, and be able to show the gallery or the person who's representing your art, to show them that you can reproduce that particular type of art over and over again. Because the intention of the gallery owner is to be able to say, hey, I can sell you this piece from this artist, and if you want more, they can produce more. And it's not to say that they repeat, right? They repeat exactly the same piece. It's just the style is the same, the medium is the same. You can recognize that signature of style from the artist. I also remember hearing that it's not good to jump around from medium to medium to, style to style, and that was kind of frowned upon. But I realize now sometimes that's not such a bad thing. If you are trying out different things, different mediums, trying to find your own creative style, that is perfectly fine. Another thing too, if you're a seasoned artist and now you're starting to venture into a whole new medium, I think that's fine too. And I also believe that all that will get integrated into your own artistic style. Just because you sort of abandon this, say oil painting like me, I haven't done oil painting for some time, but I have a feeling I'm going to be returning to that at some point. You can integrate those mediums and those techniques and those different styles. If, for example, you stopped painting or you stopped doing ceramics or whatever, and you decided, I'm just going to focus on writing poetry. I think I'm just going to focus on writing. And then you do that for a couple years. You can come back and start to integrate poetry into your art, into your ceramics. This is same thing with photography. And what's really cool these days is that mixed media, the style of mixing different mediums together, photography, writing, collaging, painting, all of that now is giving art so much interesting and rich look. So that's just a side note. I cut off on a tangent there, but I just wanted to remind you guys that if you allow yourself to have a beginner's mind, this will help you continue to be re-inspired. It will help you to continue to be creative and continue to create, and to give yourself permission to start from scratch, because that is also part of blossoming and growing and evolving to becoming the artist that you are today and tomorrow and the next day. So that's it for the episode. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, please subscribe. Click on the button if you're watching this on YouTube. And I invite you who are listening on podcast, Spotify, iHeartradio, please follow my podcast. And again, thank you to all of you who are listening or watching. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to our next episode. Bye. Stay creative.